I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, when I heard the knock that would change everything about my relationship with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Through the frosted glass of my front door, I could make out a figure holding what looked like a clipboard, and my stomach immediately sank because nothing good ever came from clipboard-wielding visitors in this neighborhood. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s with a severe bob haircut and glasses that seemed to magnify her perpetually disapproving expression. She wore a pressed pantsuit despite the bitter February cold, and her lips were pursed so tight they looked like they might crack. "Mr. Edwards," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your utility usage." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "My utility usage?" "Yes. The HOA board has been monitoring the neighborhood's energy consumption, and your heating bills are significantly higher than your neighbors'. It's affecting our community's environmental standing." I felt my jaw drop slightly. "You've been monitoring my heating bills? How would you even know what they are?" Patricia adjusted her glasses with one manicured finger. "We have our methods, Mr. Edwards. The point is, you're using 30% more natural gas than comparable homes in the neighborhood. It's excessive and, frankly, irresponsible." "It's winter," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "I keep my house at 70 degrees. That's perfectly normal." "Normal," Patricia scoffed. 68 degrees is the recommended temperature. You're wasting energy and contributing to higher costs for everyone." "How exactly am I contributing to anyone else's costs? I pay my own gas bill." She waved her hand dismissively. "That's not the point. The point is that as members of this community, we all have a responsibility to maintain certain standards. I'm here to inform you that the board has voted to require you to reduce your heating usage by 25%, effective immediately." I stood there in my doorway, cold air rushing past Patricia into my warm house, completely stunned. "You're telling me the HOA is trying to control my thermostat?" "We're not trying to control anything," she said primly. "We're simply enforcing community standards. You signed the covenant when you purchased your home, Mr. Edwards." Section 12, subsection 4 clearly states that homeowners must maintain reasonable and responsible utility usage. "That section is about not watering your lawn during droughts," I protested. "Not about indoor heating in the middle of winter." Patricia pulled out a sheet of paper from her clipboard and thrust it at me. "The board has interpreted the covenant to include all utilities. You have 2 weeks to comply, or you'll face a fine of $100 per day." "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "You can't fine me for heating my own house to a comfortable temperature. Read the notice, Mr. Edwards. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my walkway, her sensible heels clicking against the concrete. I closed the door and looked at the paper in my hand. It was official HOA letterhead, complete with the board signatures. The notice claimed that my heating usage from December through January had exceeded community standards, and demanded that I reduce my consumption or face daily fines starting March 1st. My name is Bryan Edwards, and I'm a 32-year-old software engineer who works from home. I bought this 3-bedroom house in Meadowbrook Estates 2 years ago, thinking it would be a quiet place to live and work. The HOA had seemed reasonable at first, mainly concerned with lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. But 6 months ago, Patricia Hendricks had been elected president, and since then, the association had become increasingly invasive. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled up my gas bills on my laptop. Patricia was right that my usage was higher than it had probably been for the previous homeowner, but there was a good reason for that. The house had been vacant for 3 months before I bought it, and the previous owners had been a retired couple who spent winters in Florida. Of course, my bills were higher. I was actually using the house. My gas bills averaged about $200 during the coldest months, which seemed perfectly reasonable for a 2,400 square foot house in Ohio winter. I looked at the HOA notice again, focusing on the threat of $100 per day fines. That would be $3,000 a month, far more than my actual heating costs. I called my friend Marcus, who was a real estate attorney in Cleveland. After explaining the situation, he was quiet for a moment. "That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard," Marcus finally said. "HOAs have pretty broad authority, but they can't regulate your utility usage like that. The covenant section they're citing is definitely about outdoor water usage. There's no legal basis for this. So, what do I do?" "You could hire a lawyer and fight it, but that'll cost you several $1,000s even if you win. Or you could try to work with the board, see if there's some compromise." "I'm not compromising on heating my house to a reasonable temperature," I said firmly. Marcus sighed. "Then you might be in for a fight. Document everything. Save all your communications with them. If they actually try to fine you, that's when you'd have grounds for a lawsuit." After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the rest of the evening researching Ohio HOA laws. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Patricia and her board were way out of line. HOAs could regulate exterior appearances and enforce noise ordinances, but they couldn't dictate how much energy I used inside my own home, especially when I was paying for it myself. The next morning, I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which according to their website was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. In the meantime, I sent a certified letter to the board, formally contesting their notice and requesting the specific legal authority for their policy. The week dragged by, and I kept my thermostat at exactly 70 degrees, monitoring my gas usage obsessively. I even installed a smart thermostat that tracked my hourly consumption. The data confirmed what I already knew. My usage was completely normal for a house my size with someone home all day. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked the 3 blocks to the Meadowbrook Community Center. It was a small brick building with a meeting room that could hold about 30 people. When I arrived at 7 sharp, there were already a dozen residents in folding chairs, facing a table where Patricia sat with 4 other board members. I recognized a few neighbors. Gerald Thompson, a retired accountant who lived 2 doors down, Susan Martinez, a teacher who was always friendly when we passed on morning walks, and Todd Wheeler, who I'd only spoken to once at a neighborhood barbecue. The other board members were strangers to me. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw me take a seat in the back row. She made a show of checking her watch and then called the meeting to order. The first 20 minutes were devoted to mundane business: approval of last month's minutes, discussion of playground equipment maintenance, and a debate about whether to repave the community center parking lot. Finally, Patricia moved to new business. "We need to address a concerning trend in neighborhood energy consumption," she began, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. Over the past several months, the board has become aware that some residents are using significantly more utilities than others, which reflects poorly on our community's commitment to environmental responsibility. "How are you tracking individual utility usage?" Susan Martinez asked, her brow furrowed. "That information should be private." Patricia waved her hand. "We have our sources. The point is that excessive consumption is a problem and the board has taken action to address it." I raised my hand. "I'd like to speak to this issue." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. There will be time for homeowner comments at the end of the meeting, Mr. Edwards. This directly concerns me, I said, standing up. You sent me a notice threatening fines because my heating bills are supposedly too high. I'd like to know the legal basis for this policy and how you obtained my private utility information. A murmur went through the other residents. Gerald Thompson turned in his chair to look at me with interest. The board has authority under the covenant to enforce community standards, Patricia said stiffly. What specific section? I pressed. Because I've read the entire covenant and there's nothing about indoor utility usage. Todd Wheeler, one of the board members, cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should table this discussion until we've consulted with the association's attorney. We don't need an attorney, Patricia snapped. The covenant is clear. Section 12, subsection 4 addresses utility usage. That's about outdoor water usage during droughts, I said, my voice getting louder. It says nothing about heating or electricity. The spirit of the rule applies to all utilities, Patricia insisted. Susan Martinez raised her hand. I'm confused. Are we fining people for heating their homes now? Because my bills have been pretty high too this winter, and I keep my thermostat at 72. Exactly, I said. This is completely arbitrary. I'm being targeted for having normal utility bills. Patricia's face was turning red. You are not being targeted, Mr. Edwards. You are being held accountable, which is something you clearly have trouble with. I'd like to see a motion to rescind this policy, Gerald Thompson spoke up. I don't think the board has the authority to regulate indoor utility usage. We don't need a motion, Patricia said coldly. The board has already voted. I wasn't aware of this vote, Susan Martinez said, looking at the other board members. When did this happen? There was an awkward silence. Finally, Todd Wheeler spoke up. Patricia sent an email last week asking for approval of new environmental standards. I voted yes, but I didn't realize it was about penalizing specific homeowners. I didn't get any email, another board member, a woman named Jennifer Cole, said sharply. Patricia, did you actually get board approval for this? Patricia's face was now bright red. I have the authority as president to make certain decisions without full board votes when time is of the essence. No, you don't, Gerald said firmly. He was clearly familiar with HOA procedures. All enforcement actions require a majority board vote. If you didn't get proper approval, this notice is void. I felt a surge of relief and vindication. So the fine threat is invalid. The meeting is adjourned, Patricia announced abruptly, gathering her papers. The board will reconvene in executive session. We can't have an executive session without proper notice, Jennifer Cole protested, but Patricia was already marching toward the door. I left the meeting feeling slightly better. It seemed like at least some of the board members were reasonable and hadn't actually approved Patricia's overreach. But I knew Patricia well enough by now to realize she wouldn't let this go easily. The next morning, I found another notice on my door. This one claimed that my failure to respond appropriately to the previous notice constituted willful disregard for community standards, and that I was now being fined $50 for that infraction alone. I took a photo of the notice and immediately sent it to Marcus. His response was swift. This is harassment. Document everything. You might need a restraining order. But before I could decide on my next move, something unexpected happened. I received an email from Jennifer Cole, the board member who had questioned Patricia at the meeting. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her and Todd Wheeler to discuss the situation. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Columbus on Saturday morning. Jennifer was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and an air of competence. Todd was younger, probably early 40s, and seemed genuinely embarrassed about the whole situation. Patricia has been increasingly difficult to work with, Jennifer explained, stirring her coffee. This utility monitoring thing came out of nowhere. She presented it as a sustainability initiative, but none of us realized she was planning to target specific homeowners. How did she even get my utility information? I asked. Todd looked uncomfortable. She mentioned having a contact at the gas company. Someone who could pull consumption data by address. That's illegal, I said flatly. Utility usage is private information. She can't just request it without my permission. Jennifer nodded. We realized that after the meeting. Todd and I did some research, and we're pretty sure Patricia has violated several privacy laws, not to mention overstepped her authority as HOA president. So what happens now? I asked. We're calling for a special meeting to vote on removing Patricia as president, Jennifer said. We already have 3 board members in favor, which is enough. But we wanted to talk to you first, because we need to understand the full scope of what she's been doing. I spent the next hour telling them everything. The initial confrontation, the threats, the invalid fines. Jennifer took notes, and Todd kept shaking his head in disbelief. The thing is, I said, I just want to be left alone to live in my house in peace. I don't want to be in a war with the HOA, but Patricia has made that impossible. We understand, Jennifer said, and we're going to fix this. But we need your help. Would you be willing to speak at the special meeting and present your documentation? I agreed, and we scheduled the meeting for the following Wednesday. Jennifer and Todd were going to notify all homeowners and make sure everything was done according to proper procedures. But Patricia wasn't going down without a fight. On Monday morning, I woke up to find that someone had placed a large sign in my front yard. It read, "This homeowner refuses to be environmentally responsible. His excessive utility usage hurts our community." I stood in my bathrobe on my front lawn, staring at this sign in complete disbelief. Several neighbors were already outside, walking their dogs or getting their newspapers, and they were all staring at me and my new lawn decoration. I took photos from multiple angles, then pulled the sign out of the ground. It was professionally made, printed on rigid foam board with metal stakes. This had cost money and effort. Patricia had really gone out of her way to humiliate me. Susan Martinez walked over from across the street. "Bryan, this is completely out of line. I'm sorry this is happening to you." "Did you see who put it up?" I asked. "No, but I think I know who's behind it," she said grimly. "This is exactly Patricia's style. She did something similar to the Johnsons last year when they wanted to install solar panels. She claimed it would be an eyesore and put flyers in everyone's mailbox. What happened with the Johnsons? They moved," Susan said. "Got tired of fighting with her." "But you shouldn't have to move because of a bully." I thanked Susan and took the sign inside. Then I called Marcus again and sent him the photos. His response was immediate and emphatic. "That's defamation," he said, "and possibly harassment. Bryan, I think you need to file a police report." For a yard sign, for a pattern of harassment. The sign, the illegal fines, the privacy violations. Individually, they might seem minor, but together they constitute harassment. And if she got your utility data illegally, that's a crime. I drove to the Columbus Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my statement seemed skeptical at first, but when I showed him all the documentation, including the evidence that Patricia had somehow obtained my private utility records, his demeanor changed. "We'll look into this," he said. "Accessing someone's utility records without authorization could be identity theft or fraud. Do you know specifically how she got this information?" "One of the board members said she has a contact at the gas company," I explained. The officer made a note. We'll follow up with the utility company. If an employee improperly accessed your records, that's a serious breach of privacy. I left the police station feeling slightly better but also exhausted. This whole situation had spiraled so far beyond a simple disagreement about a heating bill. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 7 in the evening. I spent Tuesday preparing my statement and organizing all my documentation. Marcus offered to come with me as legal counsel, and I gratefully accepted. Wednesday arrived cold and gray, with the threat of snow in the air. When Marcus and I walked into the community center at 6:45, it was already packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. Apparently, word had spread about the controversy, and the entire neighborhood wanted to see what would happen. Patricia sat at the board table, her face set in an expression of rigid determination. Jennifer, Todd, and the other board members looked uncomfortable. There was an empty seat at the table where the fifth board member apparently should have been. At exactly 7, Jennifer called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. This special meeting has been called to address serious concerns about HOA management and to potentially vote on new leadership." Patricia interrupted immediately. "I object to these proceedings. This meeting was called without proper authorization." "Actually," Todd said, consulting a document, "according to the HOA bylaws, any 3 board members can call a special meeting with 72 hours notice. We sent notice on Saturday, so we're in compliance." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Jennifer continued. "We're here because President Hendricks has taken several actions that may exceed her authority and potentially violate homeowner privacy rights. Mr. Edwards has been directly affected by these actions, and he's asked to speak." "Mr. Edwards." I stood up, Marcus beside me. I walked to the front of the room and my hands were shaking slightly as I unfolded my notes. "2 weeks ago," I began, "Patricia Hendricks came to my door and told me my heating bills were too high. She threatened me with $100 per day fines if I didn't reduce my utility usage by 25%. When I asked how she knew what my heating bills were, she said the HOA had been monitoring utility usage. I held up the first notice Patricia had given me. This notice claims authority under the HOA covenant, but the section cited is about outdoor water usage, not indoor heating. I'm a software engineer who works from home. My house is occupied 24 hours a day. My heating usage is completely normal for a house this size with constant occupancy." Someone in the audience called out, "How much is your bill?" "About $200 a month during winter," I replied. "Which according to the gas company's own website is average for a house my size in Ohio." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Apparently, my bills weren't unusual at all. "After the last board meeting," I continued, "when several board members questioned Patricia's authority to issue these fines, I received another notice with additional fines. Then on Monday, someone placed a sign in my yard accusing me of being environmentally irresponsible and claiming I was hurting the community. I held up photos of the sign, and there were audible gasps from the audience. "That's defamation," someone shouted. "This is more than just an HOA dispute," I said. "Patricia obtained my private utility records without my permission. That's illegal. I've filed a police report, and the authorities are investigating how she accessed this information." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is a witch hunt. I have done nothing wrong. Everything I've done has been in the best interest of this community." "You violated Mr. Edwards' privacy," Jennifer said firmly. "You issued fines without board approval. You've harassed a homeowner for having normal utility bills." "Patricia, these are serious overreaches of authority." I am the president of this HOA, Patricia said, her voice rising. I have the right to enforce community standards. Not unilaterally, Todd interjected, and not by breaking the law. Marcus stepped forward. I'm Marcus Foster, Mr. Edwards' attorney. I want to make it clear that my client has grounds for multiple lawsuits here: harassment, defamation, invasion of privacy, and potentially fraud. The only reason we haven't filed yet is because we were hoping this could be resolved internally. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia looked around wildly, seeming to realize for the first time that she had lost the room entirely. I'd like to make a motion, Gerald Thompson called out from the audience. I move that Patricia Hendricks be removed as HOA president, effective immediately, for exceeding her authority and potentially breaking the law. I second, Susan Martinez said loudly. All in favor? Jennifer asked the board members. 4 hands went up: Jennifer, Todd, and 2 others. Patricia was the only one who didn't vote. The motion passes, Jennifer said. Patricia, you're no longer president. Please surrender all HOA records and materials to Todd by the end of the week. Patricia stood there for a moment, trembling with rage. Then she swept all her papers into her bag and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a moment, then broke into scattered applause. Jennifer banged a gavel I hadn't noticed was there. Let's maintain order, she said. We need to elect a new president. I nominate Todd Wheeler. The vote was unanimous. Todd looked slightly shell-shocked but accepted the position. First order of business, Todd said. I move to rescind all fines and notices issued to Bryan Edwards related to his utility usage. Seconded, Jennifer said. All in favor? Another unanimous vote. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Mr. Edwards, Todd continued, on behalf of the board, I apologize for the harassment you've endured. The HOA will take no further action regarding your utility usage or any other internal household matter. You have our commitment that this kind of overreach will not happen again. Marcus leaned over and whispered, That's about as good as you could hope for. The rest of the meeting dealt with procedural matters and setting a date for proper elections. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand and apologizing. Several admitted they'd had their own run-ins with Patricia, but had been too intimidated to fight back. Susan Martinez pulled me aside. You did the neighborhood a favor. Patricia has been making everyone miserable for months. Maybe now we can go back to being a normal community. I walked home with Marcus, feeling like an enormous weight had been lifted. Is it really over? I asked. Probably not quite yet, Marcus said. You still have the police investigation into how she got your records, and she might try to retaliate in some way, but the HOA part is done. He was right. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Morrison with the Columbus Police Department. Mr. Edwards, we've completed our investigation into how Mrs. Hendricks obtained your utility records. She had a friend who works as a customer service representative at Ohio Gas and Electric. This employee accessed your account multiple times without authorization and provided printed statements to Mrs. Hendricks. What happens now? I asked. The employee has been fired and is being charged with unauthorized access to computer systems. Mrs. Hendricks is being charged as an accessory and with harassment. Both are misdemeanors, but they're facing fines and potentially probation. I wasn't sure how I felt about Patricia facing criminal charges. Part of me just wanted to move on. But another part recognized that what she'd done was serious and deserved consequences. Thank you for investigating, I told the detective. Of course, we take privacy violations seriously. You may be contacted by the prosecutor's office for a statement. Sure enough, About a week later, I received a call from an assistant prosecutor asking me to provide a written statement about the harassment I'd experienced. I documented everything: the threats, the fines, the yard sign, all of it. The case moved slowly through the legal system. Spring arrived, and I was finally able to relax in my house without constantly worrying about HOA notices or surprise fines. The new board under Todd's leadership was professional and reasonable. They focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. In May, I received notice that Patricia's case was being resolved through a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to harassment and was sentenced to a year of probation, community service, and ordered to pay me $2,000 in restitution for the emotional distress and attorney fees I'd incurred. The utility company employee faced similar charges and also received probation plus a permanent ban from working in any position with access to customer records. I ran into Patricia once at a grocery store in late June. She saw me in the produce section and quickly turned away, hurrying down another aisle. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She destroyed her own reputation and created legal problems for herself, all because she couldn't let go of an absurd obsession with my heating bill. The $2,000 in restitution arrived in early July. Marcus had charged me $1,500 for his help, so I came out slightly ahead financially, but that had never been the point. The point was establishing that homeowners had rights, and that HOA boards couldn't just do whatever they wanted, especially when it involved invading privacy and breaking the law. In August, the HOA held its regular elections. Jennifer was elected president, Todd remained as vice president, and several new board members joined. One of the first actions of the new board was to thoroughly review and update the HOA covenant and bylaws, clarifying the scope of the board's authority and explicitly stating that internal household matters like utility usage were outside the HOA's jurisdiction. They also implemented new transparency measures. All board meetings had to have public agendas posted a week in advance. Any proposed fines or enforcement actions required documentation and a majority board vote. And most importantly, homeowners gained a formal appeals process for any HOA actions they disagreed with. Susan Martinez and I became good friends. She later told me that at least 5 other families had been considering moving because of Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. My fight had convinced them to stay and push for change instead. You reminded everyone that HOAs are supposed to serve homeowners, not control them, Susan said over coffee one Saturday morning. Patricia had everyone so intimidated that we'd forgotten we had power too. By fall, life in Meadowbrook Estates had returned to a peaceful normalcy. The community center hosted a Halloween party that was actually fun, not a rigid, overly controlled affair like the previous year. Kids ran around in costumes, parents chatted and laughed, and there was a general sense of relief and renewal. I kept my thermostat at a comfortable 70 degrees throughout the winter, and nobody said a word about it. My heating bills were exactly what they'd always been: normal, reasonable, and none of the HOA's business. In December, almost a year after this whole saga began, I received a Christmas card from Todd Wheeler. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing up to tyranny, one heating bill at a time. The neighborhood is better because of your courage. Enjoy a warm and cozy holiday season." I smiled and put the card on my refrigerator. Then I sat down in my living room, perfectly heated to 70 degrees, and reflected on everything that had happened. The experience had taught me several important lessons. First, Bullies often back down when confronted, especially when their actions are exposed to scrutiny. Patricia had counted on my compliance, never expecting that I would push back so firmly. Second, documentation is crucial. Every photo I took, every email I saved, every notice I kept had been essential in building my case and proving the pattern of harassment. Third, most people are reasonable and decent when given accurate information. The other board members and neighbors hadn't supported Patricia's actions once they understood what was really happening. They just needed someone to speak up first, and finally, privacy matters. The casual violation of my utility records might have seemed minor to Patricia, but it was a serious breach that rightfully carried legal consequences. People have a right to live their lives without invasive monitoring from their HOA or anyone else. I thought about the previous homeowners, the retired couple who'd fled to Florida every winter. Had Patricia harassed them too? Or had this vendetta started with me specifically? I'd never know for sure, but I suspected I wasn't her first target, just the first one who'd fought back effectively. Marcus called me in January to tell me that Patricia's probation was going smoothly, and she was unlikely to face any additional legal issues. She's learned her lesson, he said. And more importantly, other HOA boards in the area are taking notice. Your case has become somewhat famous in HOA legal circles. Famous? I asked, bemused. Well, within a very niche community, Marcus laughed. But yes, it's being used as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of following proper procedures. You've probably prevented other homeowners from going through what you did. That thought made me feel good. I hadn't wanted to be in this fight, but since I'd been forced into it, at least some good had come from it. The following month, Ohio Gas and Electric sent me a letter apologizing for the unauthorized access to my account and informing me that they'd implemented new security measures and employee training to prevent similar violations. They also credited my account $50 as a gesture of goodwill. In March, exactly 1 year after Patricia's threatened fines were supposed to have started, I calculated what I would have paid if she'd gotten her way. At $100 per day, it would have been over $30,000 by now. Instead, I'd paid normal heating bills, invested in a good attorney for a few hours of work, and established important precedents about homeowner rights. Spring arrived again, and I was planting flowers in my front yard when Gerald Thompson walked by with his dog. "Garden's looking good, Bryan," he called out. "Thanks, Gerald. How's retirement treating you?" "Better now that we have a sane HOA," he said, grinning. "You know, I've been in this neighborhood for 20 years and I've seen 4 different HOA presidents. Patricia was by far the worst. Jennifer's probably the best." "What made Patricia so bad?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, besides the obvious." Gerald thought for a moment. "I think she was someone who needed to feel important, and the HOA presidency was the only real power she'd ever had. It went to her head. She started seeing every little thing as a crisis that needed her intervention." "That actually makes me feel a little sorry for her," I admitted. "Don't feel too sorry," Gerald said. "She made a lot of people miserable before you stopped her." Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions. After Gerald walked on, I finished planting my petunias and went inside to wash up. My house was comfortable, my heating bills were my own business, and the HOA was functioning the way it should, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and otherwise staying out of people's private lives. I never saw Patricia again after that awkward grocery store encounter. Someone told me she and her husband had moved to a condo in Dublin, a different Columbus suburb, presumably one without an HOA or at least one where she couldn't be in charge. The following year, I was asked to serve on the HOA board myself, but I politely declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Instead, I volunteered to help with the community garden project and the annual neighborhood cleanup day. Those felt like more positive ways to contribute. Susan Martinez did join the board, though, and she was excellent. She brought a teacher's patience and organizational skills to the role, and she made sure homeowners felt heard and respected. The HOA became something it should have been all along, a helpful organization that supported the neighborhood rather than policing it. My heating bills remained blissfully boring and unremarkable. I kept my house at 70 degrees in winter, and sometimes even 72 on particularly cold days. Nobody monitored me, nobody cared, and that's exactly how it should be. I did make one lasting change, though. I had Marcus help me draft a letter to the Ohio State Legislature, suggesting reforms to HOA laws. The letter outlined the abuses I'd experienced and proposed clearer limits on HOA authority, stronger privacy protections for homeowners, and better enforcement mechanisms when boards exceeded their power. To my surprise, a state representative contacted me. Representative Linda Chen from the Columbus area had apparently been hearing similar complaints from other constituents. She was interested in drafting legislation to address HOA overreach and wanted to hear my story firsthand. I met with Representative Chen and her staff in April. I walked them through everything that had happened, and they took copious notes. 6 months later, Representative Chen introduced House Bill 847, the Homeowner Privacy Protection Act. It explicitly prohibited HOAs from monitoring individual utility usage, required warrants or homeowner consent for any surveillance activities, and established stronger penalties for board members who exceeded their authority. The bill had bipartisan support and passed both the Ohio House and Senate before being signed into law by the governor in March of the following year. When Representative Chen's office called to invite me to the signing ceremony, I was genuinely moved. At the ceremony, Representative Chen gave a speech about the importance of balancing community standards with individual rights. She mentioned my case specifically, though without using my name, and talked about how one person standing up to injustice could create ripple effects that protected thousands of others. After the ceremony, Representative Chen shook my hand. "Thank you for bringing this issue to my attention, Mr. Edwards. Sometimes the most important legislation comes from listening to constituents' real experiences." I drove home from the state capitol in Columbus that day feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. What had started as an absurd dispute over my heating bill had turned into meaningful legal reform that would protect homeowners across Ohio for years to come. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life continued peacefully. The HOA organized summer concerts in the park, holiday decorating contests, and community yard sales. Jennifer ran board meetings efficiently and fairly. Todd managed the budget responsibly, and Susan made sure every homeowner felt welcome and valued. I became friends with several neighbors I'd barely known before. We had barbecues in each other's backyards, helped with home repairs, and watched each other's houses during vacations. It was the kind of genuine community that an HOA should facilitate, not prevent. On the 2-year anniversary of Patricia's first visit to my door, Marcus and I met for lunch at a restaurant in the short North District of Columbus. "You ever think about writing a book about all this?" Marcus asked, working on his burger. "God, no," I laughed. "I'm happy to have it behind me." It's a good story, though. David versus Goliath, HOA edition. "More like David versus a very aggressive middle-aged woman with a clipboard," I said. But yeah, I guess it turned out well. Better than well, Marcus said. You got the board changed. You got actual criminal charges filed for the privacy violations, and you helped pass a law that protects thousands of homeowners. That's a pretty good outcome for refusing to turn down your thermostat. When I thought about it that way, it really was remarkable. All I'd wanted was to heat my house in peace. I'd never intended to become some kind of homeowner rights activist. But circumstances had pushed me into that role, and I'd risen to the challenge. The restitution money Patricia had been ordered to pay me had gone into a savings account. I decided to donate it to a legal aid organization that helped homeowners fight HOA disputes. It seemed like an appropriate way to close that chapter and help others who might face similar struggles. Years passed, and the whole incident became something I occasionally mentioned at parties when HOA horror stories came up. Oh, you think your HOA is bad? Let me tell you about the time mine tried to fine me for my heating bills. It always got laughs and incredulous questions. But the real victory wasn't in the story I could tell. It was in the peace and normalcy I got to enjoy every single day. It was coming home to a house that was mine, where I could set the temperature to whatever I wanted without fear. It was living in a neighborhood with a functional HOA that actually served its purpose without overreaching. It was also in the letters I occasionally received from other homeowners across Ohio who'd used the new law to protect themselves from overreaching boards. Representative Chen's office forwarded some of these letters to me, and each one reinforced that standing up to Patricia had been worth all the stress and hassle. One letter particularly stuck with me. It was from a single mother in Toledo whose HOA had tried to fine her for running her air conditioning too much during a heat wave. Thanks to the Homeowner Privacy Protection Act, she'd been able to shut down the board's invasive monitoring immediately. "You saved me from months of stress and probably thousands of dollars," she wrote. "Thank you for fighting when it mattered." I framed that letter and hung it in my home office, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we never expected to fight. On a cold February evening, 5 years after this all began, I sat in my living room with my thermostat set to a comfortable 70 degrees. Snow fell softly outside my windows. My heating bill would probably hit $200 this month, and that was perfectly fine. I'd learned that home isn't just a place, it's also a feeling of security and autonomy. It's knowing that you have rights and protections, that unreasonable demands can be challenged, and that communities work best when there's mutual respect between governing bodies and the governed. Patricia had tried to take that feeling away from me, to make me feel monitored and controlled in my own home. Instead, her overreach had strengthened protections for everyone and reminded an entire neighborhood that HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not rule over them. I thought about calling Marcus to thank him again for his help, but we'd been through that conversation a dozen times already. Instead, I simply sat in my warm house, grateful for the ordinary comfort of a properly heated home and the hard-won peace of knowing my thermostat was nobody's business but mine. The HOA sent out its monthly newsletter, delivered via email now instead of Patricia's old printed versions that had wasted paper and money. The newsletter talked about upcoming community events, reminded everyone about lawn care guidelines as spring approached, and included a recipe exchange section that Susan had added. It was boring in the best possible way. No threats, no surveillance, no overreach. Just a functional community organization doing its job. As I finished reading the newsletter and deleted the email, I heard a gentle knock on my door. For just a moment, my heart rate spiked, an old reflex from the days when knocks meant confrontation. But when I opened the door, it was just Susan from across the street. "Hey, Bryan, we're organizing a neighborhood welcome party for the new family moving in next week. Would you be willing to help set up?" "Of course," I said, smiling. "What do you need?" "Just help moving tables and chairs at the community center. Saturday afternoon if you're free." "I'll be there." Susan headed back across the street, and I closed the door. This was what neighborhood life should be. Friendly neighbors, reasonable requests, and community events that actually brought people together. The new family moving in would never know about the drama that had happened here, about Patricia's reign of terror or the fight over heating bills. They'd just experience Meadowbrook Estates as a pleasant neighborhood with a functional HOA, and that was exactly how it should be. I made myself dinner, watched some television, and went to bed in my comfortably heated house. No anxiety about surprise fines or yard signs. No worries about being monitored or harassed. Just the simple peace of being home, and if I set my thermostat to 71 degrees instead of 70 that night, well, that was my choice to make. My house, my heating bill, my business, exactly as it should be.